Hello everybody, I have a bit of a trek home from grocery shopping, so I just thought to record a few thoughts on my way. It's probably going to be a bit noisy because the road's rough. Rough all the way. Some parts are rougher than others, but anyway, I thought it was interesting with the week of YouTube drama that we just had, and the Media Watch segment that we watched last night. There was actually more to it. I didn't want to upload the whole thing. Probably the most relevant part was about Gabby and the exploitation of Gabby by the media, and let's not forget by YouTube, because YouTubers are doing it as well. And I did notice some comments about that it was YouTubers that found the spot where her body was, and whilst I understand that that is the case, it wasn't from going live and making money off YouTube covering true crime cases that she was found. It was just a family who were documenting their travels. So in that sense, checking your footage, whether you've got doorbell cameras or home security, or you're just documenting your travels, then yes, it's a very helpful thing for the police if you've got a camera running. But people are not covering this case on YouTube for that reason, or TikTok for that matter. The vast majority are covering the case because it's profitable entertainment, and very few are paying their respects to the deceased or their families. And so I guess that's what I want to start out with by discussing this topic, is to pay my respects to the Petito family, and to let them know that I don't particularly like this exploitation that's going on. I agree with the hunt for Brian Laundrie. I think that that's a good thing that the police are doing that, but the minute by minute coverage and wall-to-wall TV coverage, it's a little bit too much. And I also agree with other creators who absolutely do believe that not enough cases get this sort of coverage. You know, we've got a little girl missing in Tennessee. I'm sure there's thousands of kids missing all over the country, and they're not getting any coverage at all. They're lucky to get 10 seconds on their local TV stations. So there is absolutely an imbalance. There's a lot of exploitation going on. I don't believe that true crime has entertainment value insofar as unsolved crimes. It's okay if you're putting out factual information to try and help solve a crime. The actual police tips and information, and that gets it out to more people. But when you're making up stories just to fill the time so that you can have this wall-to-wall coverage and get viewers over to your channel looking at your videos, then that's doing it for entertainment value, and it's just something ethically screwed up about finding joy in other people's pain and heartache. I get no joy from it. I don't know what joy other people get from it. They say it's because they want justice for those victims, but does that mean that they don't want justice for victims they don't cover? Does that mean that they are selective about who they want justice for? And how are they selective? Is it a blue-eyed blonde little girl, or kids in general? How are they selective? How does your favourite true crime channel cover this information? Are they respectful towards the families who have lost their loved ones? Are they always jumping to the conclusion that the family must have done something without giving them the benefit of doubt? Are they just looking for dirt that makes them look guilty? Because if that's the type of true crime that you're following and you're enjoying it, then you're exploiting people's pain for your entertainment. And there is just something not right about that. It's very hard to put into words what I think is not right about that. But if your favourite true crime channel is being respectful towards the families and close friends of the victims, and they're giving you factual information that the police have put out there to help find these missing people or children, then I see that as constructive. I see social media can be constructive in that fashion if we so choose to make it have that sort of impact. But that's not what the large majority are doing. The large majority are using social media to victimise the families, to dig up dirt on them, to tell stories and spread rumours. And what crime was ever solved by rumours and gossip? No crime was ever solved that way. In fact, a heck of a lot of crimes have not been solved because of all the rumours and the gossip that have been injected into the investigation, bringing up ridiculous tips to the hotlines, tying up the hotlines with what could otherwise be genuinely valid tips that the police could actually follow up. The whole "I had a funny vibe" or "the spirit box told me" type phone calls are not helpful. They're just tying up the phone lines. They're just tying up services. So we need to be socially responsible when we cover these types of crimes. We need to respect the victims, the one that's missing, and everyone who is impacted that is related to it or related to the victim or has a friendship with the victim. These people all have a vast amount of love for each other that we don't have. We can pretend we do. We can tell the whole tubes and the whole world, yes, yes, we love Gabby, we love these people. But the fact is, we don't love them the way their own family loves them. That's the cold, hard truth of the matter. I'm still hesitant to make victims out of Brian Laundrie's parents. They do have a legitimate right to not talk to the media, to not talk to anyone if they don't want to. You have a Constitution in America that protects that. If you're angry because the Constitution that protects you also protects Brian's parents, then you need to have a long, hard think about what that means to you personally. Because if you're waiving your rights because you don't want Brian's parents to have those rights, then what does that say about you and the way you're approaching the rule of law? Your Constitution is the rule of law for government, for the police, for government bodies, for your federal government, for Congress. That's the laws that they have to abide by. If you start removing the laws that protect you as citizens because one of your citizens seems to be not doing something that you agree with, then you're removing that right from yourself. You're giving your government the power to go rogue, to do whatever the hell they want to do. You lose your power as the people. Your Constitution protects you from law enforcement and your government doing the wrong thing by you as a citizen. So sure, it sucks when it applies to someone that you don't like or that you're suspicious of. It's okay to feel that it sucks when it applies to someone you don't want it to apply to. But the fact is, if you remove that right from the laundries, you're also removing it from yourself. And you need to think about living in a country where you don't have those rights. For example, in Australia, we have a constitution, but it's just there to look pretty. All it does is says how we vote in our government. There's a few odds and ends about how our government's supposed to behave, but they don't really behave that way. They don't really stick to it. But we have no human rights bill. We have no First Amendment. We have no rights as citizens of the country. We don't even have written into any legislation the right to innocence until proven guilty. So what would America be like without the Constitution, without the rules that keeps your government from breaking your human rights? In Australia, we still sit in fear of being attacked by a country like the United States if we don't do the right thing. So to a certain degree, our government sort of sticks to a certain standard, even though it's not written really in writing. We don't really have the right to protest, but most times, sometimes when the government feels like it, they'll let us protest. But you still have to ask permission, and you've got to organise it properly, and you've got to pay a ton of money to get proper insurance and a whole bunch of other things. So I have to stop at a store, so I'm just going to hit the pause button for a moment.
Minister, last estimates on the 1st of September, I asked some questions of Deputy Commissioner Hudson and Assistant Commissioner Walton about the Fixated Persons Unit and its deployment against Mr. Christo Lanka, the producer of the Friendly Jordies program. And I did ask for the charter or the standard operating procedures for the Fixated Persons Unit to be provided on notice. While we did get on notice a descriptor of how the system works. We didn't get a copy of the standard operating procedures or the charter of the unit, if I can put it that way. Was that an oversight, or are you not going to provide that to the committee?
I'll take that question on notice, and if it was an oversight, we'll certainly make sure that we get it to you.
Thanks. And I understand that some things may be sensitive in terms of, police operations, but
yeah,
the DPP's prosecution guidelines are public documents, and I would have thought that
Well, I'm not responsible for the DPP, so...
No, but I would have thought that some of these things would be public. Does the Commissioner have anything to add?
Oh, look, Mr Searle, we package up and we send off to government. What gets provided is out of my hands. So, and I'm not engaged in the process once I work out the door in terms of what is finally provided or not.
No, but so you didn't make any policy decision about not providing the committee?
No, but nor I have on any issue since I've been coming here.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So I'll look forward to that on notice. In relation to how the matter involving Mr Lanka unfolded, I asked again some questions on notice. And on notice, you've provided that on the 2nd of December, an investigation by the Fixated Persons Unit was established by a complaint.
Yep.
The complaint originally came from the Department of Premier and Cabinet, is that correct?
I'm not involved in any operational matters.
Okay, well, I'm happy to ask the Police Commissioner, Mr Walton.
I would defer to Mr Walton, just
Mr. Walton?
to save me taking questions on notice.
I think that'd be good. Mr Walton, was it a complaint from the Department of Premier and Cabinet that initiated this matter?
Yes, Mark Walton answering that question. Yes, as outlined on the 2nd of December, that was the initial complaint that went to the Sydney City Police Area Command.
Now in the answer provided on notice, it then says the matter was referred to the Anti-Terrorism and Intelligence Group, where it was assessed and allocated to the Fixated Persons Unit. Now, just to be clear, did the Fixated Persons Unit then carry out its own assessment?
No, the Terrorism Investigation Unit carries out the assessment of the available information and subsequently allocates them for investigation. The unit then conducts a normal investigation, gathers evidence, assesses that evidence, and determines whether action is appropriate.
Right. Well, in relation to that assessment or the operation carried out by the Fixated Persons Unit, Deputy Commissioner Hudson said on the last occasion, page 26 of the transcript, and I quote, "I do not think appropriate processes were followed in that assessment," unquote. He was there referring to the operation of the Fixated Persons Unit itself. So in terms of the processes adopted by the unit, can you tell us what were the procedures that should have been followed and what in fact unfolded?
So there's a timeline in relation to this matter to provide some clarity around that answer and informing the committee in relation to this matter. So the initial investigation started on the 2nd of December. That material related to two people generally referred to as the friendly Jordies, either actor or producer. So that assessment took place and was referred to the unit for investigation. Over the course of some 6 months, they progressed that investigation. However, the date you're referring to around Mr Lanka's matter, that was the reference for Mr Hudson indicating that procedures weren't followed. What occurred there is that the unit took that fresh information relative to Mr Lanka and without further assessment or external advice from the Terrorism Investigation Unit,
It's any better, does it?
action in relation to that fresh information, which led to Mr Lanka's arrest.
It's unbelievable how deep it is.
So the process issue there that Mr Hudson was referring to, that he suggests that there should have been a fresh assessment of that fresh information.
Well, if the Fixated Persons Unit is going to be deployed against a particular person, presumably the assessment has to be done in relation to any information relating to that person or that matter. And you're saying that there was no particular assessment conducted in relation to Mr. Lanka before his arrest. Is that correct?
Only in relation to that fresh information that occurred on the day when he was subsequently arrested.
Okay, was there a warrant for Mr. Lanka's arrest?
No.
So pursuant to what power did the police make that arrest?
Well, that's the individual power of the office of constable, and those officers make that decision themselves without any consultation or influence from management or any other party that I'm aware of.
Okay, did they rely on Section 99 of LEPRA, or did they rely on their common law powers? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know when those matters are. I'm sure will be canvassed in the upcoming court matter.
Okay. In relation to an offshoot of this matter, there were efforts by the police to engage in some suppression orders against the Friendly Jordies program. You're across that?
I'm aware of that.
How did that particular application come about?
It arose at one of the adjournment dates a couple of months ago. The material or activities of Mr. Shanks on social media was raised with the police prosecutor, and the prosecutor, on assessment of that material, raised concerns around contempt and questioned whether the material should be suppressed given the pending court matter. That was done on the day by the prosecutor and the police involved in the court matter.
Okay, so to be very clear, this didn't also come from the Fixated Persons Unit. This was the prosecution's unit on a frolic of its own, was it?
Well, no, it's the prosecutor who led that evidence, who is acting on behalf of a members of the Fixated Persons Unit.
Okay. Without naming the individual, can you, what sort of rank should these people be at in order to take these actions?
Well, the Office of Constable allows any person to be an informant in accordance with the law. In this instance, there was a detective senior constable and a detective sergeant that are involved in this matter.
Okay. Now, you're aware in this matter there are some sensitivities. There's been a number of public comments around the possible perception that the police are being deployed against a political critic of the government. You understand those sensitivities?
Yes, I do.
And is there any foundation to those concerns in your view?
I think we, as police, always need to be concerned about our accountability of our actions, and certainly understand sensitivities, particularly those that are being promoted by Mr. Shanks and his supporters.
Okay, so the Fixated Persons Unit, I think we tried to drill into this last time. There's no suggestion that Mr. Lanka presented any kind of physical threat to Mr. Barilaro, is there? Mr. Hudson made that very clear last time.
Not physical, but there's also mental harm that is the potential in relation to that referral and the matters that are before the court.
Okay, and did the Fixated Persons Unit proceed on the basis of any expert psychological or psychiatric evidence on this matter?
No.
Okay, so just the police made their own independent assessment of matters?
Yes.
So you're aware in the application for the suppression that there was, amongst the foundations for the application was the fact that Mr. Shanks was running a negative agenda against the Deputy Premier. That was one of the bases for the suppression order. And issues of derogatory comments in relation to Mr. Barilaro's political position. These are the matters that, amongst the matters that the police relied upon.
Yeah, I think that, and also the potential impact on witnesses who are expected to give evidence in this matter.
But the application hit the wall pretty hard, didn't it?
It was dismissed.
Did the police get external or independent counsel's advice before proceeding with this application?
No, however, subsequent to the matter being heard, we paused independent Crown solicitor's advice in relation to the matter, and that advice suggested that the matter should be withdrawn, which we did on the first occasion.
Okay, so on reflection that maybe that advice should have been reached for ahead of making the application. Would you agree with that?
I think there's always a lot of value in hindsight review, but cautioning slowly in matters of this nature, I agree, is an appropriate course.
I mean, just to cut to the chase, there was a pretty dramatic arrest of a producer of a satirical political program which had come to sort of public attention through its trenchant criticisms of the government and Mr Barilaro. You'd want to make sure that any police proceedings against journalists of this kind really stood up to scrutiny, wouldn't you?
That might be overstating his position.
Certainly not understating it.
Mr Walton?
Sorry, could you repeat that question, please?
And/or public comment.
Okay, well, I'll put it to you directly. Given that Mr Lanka and Mr Shanks were very high-profile public critics of the government through their medium on YouTube, you would want to make sure that any criminal proceeding against them actually stacked up properly, wouldn't you?
That would certainly be my preference.
That
did not occur.
It did not occur. And of course, the police have now been ordered to pay $22,000 in legal costs to both Mr Lanka and Mr Shanks. Is that correct?
I think that might be the gross amount for both their legal attorneys.
So on the last estimates, Deputy Commissioner Hudson also stated that an associate of Mr Lanka's was under investigation at the same time as Mr Lanka was under investigation. Should we ensure that that's Mr Shanks?
Yes.
Does he remain under investigation by the New South Wales Police Force?
That matter has yet to be determined, so I don't know about active investigation, but we are waiting on advice in relation to sufficiency concerning material that's been gathered.
What crimes do you think he might have committed?
They're matters of the lawyers will provide some advice on that. Would be in the realm of intimidation.
Thought crimes.
It's not a crime to criticise the Deputy Premier, I hope, is it?
I'd be in jail.
Sorry, Mr Walton.
Mr Walton?
I'd be the first one locked up.
So what is the crime that Mr Lanka's supposed to have committed? What are the charges against him presently?
Intimidation.
Mr Lanka's supposed to have intimidated Mr John Barilaro.
Yes.
Have you met Mr Lanka?
No.
Okay, it seems to be a fairly far-fetched proposition that Mr Lanka, who's a 21-year-old young man, would
who's 65 kilos ringing wet compared to the
acknowledge that would be found in any way to have intimidated Mr Barilaro, a man of, shall we say, robust and firm opinions. What evidence do you have about that intimidation? Is it just the videos that are in the public domain?
The intimidation elements move beyond the physical capability. They move into mental harm, and I think as I see so much material online, use of social media, there is certainly a potential for people, be they high office holders or school children, to be mentally harmed and cause anguish in relation to the actions of others.
I understand that, but there would have to be a much higher threshold for public figures to be able to avail themselves of that claim, wouldn't they?
Oh, I think that's a pretty sad proposition, sir.
Issue that would be determined court.
Okay, leaving aside the particular matter, obviously there's and you've already given evidence that the police proceeded without psychological or psychiatric evidence, so they've just made a layperson's assessment, and I'm not being critical, but I'm saying that's what it is. Presumably, if we're going to draw the line between robust criticism, or whether it's of a government minister or any other public figure, and where that criticism actually becomes criminal in nature in the form of intimidation, presumably, like the DPP has a prosecution policy, the police would have to have a robust internal policy about where that line is and the circumstances in which the police would be activated against a citizen, particularly a citizen journalist like Mr. Lanka and Mr. Shanks.
I think there's definitely a brave new world in this, Mr. Searle, and I think...
In the Aldous Huxley sense.
You're all going to have to struggle with this more than I will moving into retirement, because the sort of stuff that Mr. Walton talks about online, and kids committing suicide, adults committing suicide because of online bullying and harassment, is that Parliament is going to have to get the grasp on what standard do you want us to enforce more than how we're dealing with it. So out of respect, I mean, this is new, right? This is a new phenomenon. And you know, have we dealt with this matter appropriately? Well, hindsight, we could have done things differently, no doubt, and we're learning from it. But this will be one of the great legislative challenges of this decade. Well,
Commissioner, this is in fact my question. Without that legislative apparatus, the police here have had to, well, they've made a decision, they formed a judgment, and they formed a judgment about where robust public criticism of a government minister has crossed the line. You know, it's a matter for the court, but that's the judgment the police have made. Upon what basis and on what policy has the police filled in those gaps?
Yeah, and I think Mr. Walton has explained that without having the brief in front of us, but the matter's still before the court.
I understand that.
And what happens is either we will lose and I'll have a black eye, and then I'll come to government and say, you either need to change the legislation if you want us to protect our kids online, if you want us to protect even our leaders online.
Or maybe you don't prosecute journalists.
Or no, well, what happens if Mr. Barilaro, who went off on psychological leave, are you saying that he wasn't unwell?
No, we're not talking about that matter. I'm talking about the fact that the police took this step without the psychological evidence. For example, Mr. Hudson said there was meant to be a psychological assessment as part of the fixated persons unit's own internal deliberations. That was said to be the procedure.
That's right.
Now, that didn't happen here.
There was a procedure.
Whether on the first occasion or on the new evidence. And I see Mr. Walton nodding. So that's a pretty obvious breakdown in the police's own existing procedure. How did that happen?
But again, that doesn't mean the matter will fail at court.
No, but how did it happen that the police did not?
I would never. You can never have a policy that says in these matters going forward, before you determine psychological harm to a victim, you've got to get an independent report. It's ridiculous, because that is a personal position on what causes someone stress and anxiety and causes them to go off and have sick leave. Like, I just think...
I had understood that was part of the process of...
is that we would never go... And when there's been psychological harm in investigation, we would never go and get an expert report on that. And that would be tested by the magistrate or the judge when they interview the victim.
Commissioner, are you saying that if an element of the offence is psychological harm was caused, which seems to be what you're suggesting here in this, that you would never get expert evidence?
Discussing this issue about any time a matter goes before the court and there's an aspect of someone being psychologically harmed, that we have historically ever gotten a specialist report? Well, we haven't.
Well, you don't, Mr. Walton, do you have any expert evidence or any evidence to link what Mr. Lanka has done with any psychological harm of the Deputy Premier?
Well, I'm not aware of any at the moment, but I don't have the brief in front of me as to what has been gathered in relation to the harm to Mr. Barilaro. I might just try and clarify your point there around Mr. Hudson's evidence previously. It said there are a number of people involved at different stages depending on the nature of the job, including the fixated persons panel, which includes a psychological, who can make referrals. So there is not a requirement in these matters that come to us that on every instance that panel hits and a psychiatrist or psychologist is involved in that assessment.
Mr. Walton, who in the Department of Premier and Cabinet referred Mr. Lanka to the police?
Mr. Brady, I believe, was the facilitator. He made the referral to Sydney City. I'm not sure how much detail he had provided. He may well have just been a conduit from Mr. Barilaro's office into the local police.
All right. Well, if you have any detail, if you can provide that detail on notice, Mr. Walton, that would be appreciated.
Thank you, yes.
Just to close the loop on the line of questions I was engaged in previously, Minister, when did you become aware of the Fixated Persons Unit matter against Mr. Lenker?
Well, Mr. Searle, I've learned more about that matter here in the last hour than I knew before I got here, but it is, I don't want to trivialise it, but it's not something that the police would necessarily brief me about. I mean, there's 17,000 police officers out there, and you can take it as a given that I probably found out the same time you did.
Okay. Commissioner, when did you become, were you briefed by the unit before they took that action?
No, look, I was given a high-level briefing, verbal briefing, in the last few weeks. I didn't even know who friendly Jordies were.
I think it's an age thing, Commissioner.
No, so again, I'm not making light of it, and I appreciate why we're debating it today.
Yes.
Please don't think I'm making light of it.
No.
But again, in my life of COVID and other things, it hasn't been something I've been discussing regularly. But I would have something where someone's walked in and said, look, I need to brief you on a matter, so I can take that on notice.
That's okay. If you could, that'd be great. Now, before I went to parts of the application, with the to do with the suppression order, and a lot of those matters did sort of sound very, if I could use the term, political. What are you doing as Commissioner and Minister? What are you doing to make sure that the police don't lose their sort of apolitical status here?
Well, I'm a passionate advocate for the apolitical approach of policing in New South Wales, and I don't want to necessarily, breach confidences, but I have private conversations with members of your own party to make sure that they know that even when Parliament wasn't sitting, we had there was still some open and transparent approach to law enforcement. But I got to say, I wouldn't. There's no way in the world that I could look at any of the senior executive in the police force and say that they've ever acted in a partisan manner whatsoever. In fact, quite the contrary. And I, as somebody who married into the police force, somebody who's, my late father-in-law was a senior officer, and I still don't know how he voted. And I think that's the professional approach.
I didn't mean in a party political sense. I was really talking about, that application to suppress that evidence.
No, but there was a suggestion before that in some way the police have acted in a partisan way because the gentleman in question was a critic of the government.
Yes.
I mean, if I was to use my power to track down every critic of David Elliott, well then there'd be nobody in this room.
So, but can I say I'm conflicted on the answer to the question in a sense because I didn't know about it.
No, that's okay.
But should I have known about it? I guess that's the question. But if you think there was influence from me, then there wasn't. I actually didn't know about it.
I'm not making any allegations. I'm just asking the question.
I understand what you're saying, but isn't it better that he had the ability to go direct to a constable, or is it not? I mean, I guess they're the things that Mr. Walton and I and Hudson need to debate around what is,
Because in that matter, it seems that the police applicant, if I can use that term, was concerned about, the fact that the respondent was a critic of the government, was engaged in, various political activities, criticising the politics, and then at the very end says that, Mr. Shanks is not a critic or a journalist, and this is not for, so it seems to be a very potentially dangerous spectrum for the police to be getting into an evaluation about whether someone's engaging in entertainment.
You may well be right, and that's probably a philosophical debate that we should have, but I think you've also got to, reflect on the Commissioner's point, and that is if people feel threatened and intimidated, not really necessarily the tone. I mean, I'll look at my Facebook account this afternoon, and there'll be plenty of critics of me, and that's fine. But if there's somebody who physically threatens, say, the Leader of the Opposition or the Minister for Agriculture or whatever, well then,
just to be clear, there's no suggestion of any physical threats in the matters that we've been discussing today.
No. Well, I'm not. You've got a better brief on it than me. I'm not familiar with it.
Yep. Minister, let's move on to a happier topic, perhaps, or a different topic at least.
Hopefully.